And welcome back to another episode of Staying Power, a show that is all about building a better life. And every week we come together to talk about one element of that. It could be just about anything, and it has been before. And then we hope it relates to what you're going through in your life. And by we, I mean myself, JDK Wyneken, and my awesome, amazing co-host, co-collaborator, co-producer, my friend, confidant, Ashley Knebel. Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Good. Yeah. Having a good day today.
Oh,
is that a loaded question?
Okay. But the sun's out. It's great.
It is. All right.
No,
so
all right.
I'm sure we'll tap into that with what we're going to talk about today.
No,
but it's good to see you as always, and we're of course delighted to have you listeners with us, and even our viewers, because of course now we are live streaming on our YouTube channel as well as on Instagram. So you can kind of see our dynamic if you're interested in that. And of course, if you miss any of this episode or any of our other episodes, you can get this as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And in the show notes, you can find all the information you need to connect with Ashley and or myself, including our email, stayingpowershow@gmail.com, as well as our show Instagram feed, Facebook, and more is on the way. We have a Patreon site. There's just always more that's getting added slowly but surely as we go. So lots of different ways for you to interact with us, and we'd love to hear from you. So welcome. Okay. Boy, Ashley, you do seem pretty loaded over. Yeah,
I do?
Yeah, you do. You do.
You're one to talk. So
yeah, well, yeah. So we both had pretty busy
we did,
weeks, actually.
We did. I know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
For what?
You had to go through that.
Which part?
All of what you've been going through.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. We are going to talk about this, so it's not like Ashley and I have some secret conversation going on here. But thank you. But I am happy to be here, and good. I am feeling good about where things are. But it has been a bit of a challenging week. So we're going to dig into that today, and kind of the overall umbrella of all this, underneath that umbrella, has been a lot about words and actions this week. And words and actions, of course, are the things that when we talk about connecting with other people and connecting with ourselves are the two kind of paramount things in our social interactions that we focus on.
This is true.
What do people say and what do they do? And of course, there's a lot of cliches and truisms around that, right? People are their actions more than their words, for example, right? But then, of course, words can matter. Like we talked a few weeks ago about love languages, right? Words of affirmation is a very real one.
Yes,
right?
it is.
And actions of affirmation are probably better than that, right? Or when they're joined together, at least, right? They go a lot further.
Yes.
So, I think it's fair to say that what we've both been working through over the last week, which have been very different, right? In our individual contexts, words and actions, there's been a part of that thread running through all those things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been thinking about that quite a bit for the last week or so. And so thought today we could maybe dig into that a little bit. I know we both have some insights from what we've each been working through this week and confronting this week. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the show goes on. And of course, we have our weekly segment that this week it's the 2 minutes of terror, and you'll understand why when we get there. That'll be in the third segment of the show towards
that might end
up
being like the entire segment.
Yeah, it might be, but nevertheless, you'll get a sense of it beforehand. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about this.
Right.
To kind of lead in, Ashley, when we talk about people's words and their actions, particularly in our relationships and maybe in how we see ourselves, what comes up for you in that relationship between words? Because not everybody's necessarily really good at words. Some people express more of who they are through their actions. Some people are really good with words, but their actions don't necessarily follow, or maybe they do. What comes up for you with this? Anything?
That question is so weird for me. I don't like that question. I don't.
Is it because it's an uncomfortable question, or does it feel unclear? I can clarify.
maybe clarification would be good. It always feels as if there's a grandiose expectation of an answer to come out of it, whereas I'm like, maybe nothing comes up, and maybe that is the answer.
Mm.
But it's just I never know quite what to say when I get a question like that. Uh, Irregardless, to answer your question though, without clarification,
To try to.
to try and
To try to.
make some more clarification on that question, I do agree with you that I think sometimes people, like you said, they might be great with words, they may not be great with words.
Mhm.
They may say that they intend to do something and have full intention of doing it, and because something comes up, life happens and they
Mhm.
can't follow through with their words. I still, at times like that, try and not to the cliche of like, "Well, it was the thought that counts," but I do think there are moments where that is applicable, where people may have wanted to actually follow through with the actions and something came up and they could not. Um, but then there is also a portion of that where people's words and actions, and I'm assuming this in the context of doing something good, something beneficial, something helpful for another person, right? You're
Mhm.
you're wanting to like give them some good words, affirmation, you want to help them out, do something nice for them. And or if it's in like a relationship setting where it's like, I want you to do like nicer things to show me that you love me type of thing.
Mhm.
Well, if you're going to put a precedent like that, you got to understand that the person that you're asking that from may do that, but they're gonna do it in what it looks like for them.
Mm.
And what they envision and what you envision might be completely different things.
Mm.
And so one person may think like, "Yeah, I'm really showing them all the time, like, I really love and care about them, and I'm doing these things," and that may not translate to the other person.
Particularly if that person has expectations about what that's supposed to
Yeah,
look like.
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it's like, total cliche, but, like, I may be like, "I want chocolate and flowers," and he's like, "I took the garbage out." You know?
That's the second time the garbage stories come
Well,
up.
I just feel like it's a common
It's a co
thing in all households. There's always garbage to
There's
be
always
taken out.
garbage to be
Laundry,
taken
I
out.
don't know, pick your chore.
I got
But
it.
you know what I mean? Like, my expectation of what and I don't necessarily care about chocolate. I like chocolate. I don't really care about flowers. But that could be like the standard of like that's what I was envisioning and that's what they were doing. And
Mm.
they're two different things. They both like I tried to explain and he did some action and his action had good intention. It just wasn't what I had in mind.
Mhm. So it sounds to me in a situation like that, there are expectations and there isn't a communication or an understanding between those 2 people
I
on
mean,
some
perhaps.
level.
I mean, and that's in that particular
Right. In that
situation, right?
case,
But,
sure.
I mean, I do like people that have good intentions with their words and their
Of
actions.
course. Of course. Which is a good default position,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That's the best
But
one. If you have good intentions
yeah,
with
good
both,
intentions. I think
that's
that's the good start.
that is a good
But
start.
there are times where I keep thinking about going back to something that you sent, and I don't know if now is the appropriate time to
Sure.
read or not because I thought it was so good and it really like nailed what I think you're trying to ask. So I'm gonna read it anyways. It's something by Mark Smith, and he has, I believe it's a book or a brand, but it's the Super Powered Mind. But
Mhm.
he wrote a few things, and they resonate so well.
Oh,
Of
yeah, I did send this to you a few days
yes, it
ago.
was
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
Is I'm sorry is not the same as I'll change. I care about you is not the same as I'm committed to you. I need you is not the same as I value you. I want you is not the same as I'm ready for you. I want to
Ooh.
be with you is not the same as I'll make time for you. I'll try is not the same as I am consistent. And I love you doesn't mean I'm ready to love you forever. So
Wow.
these were all
Yeah.
so good, and, like, I don't mind if you wanna pick them apart, but I thought that was really interesting when it comes to people's words and their intentions, but what gets translated, and maybe also what can get lost in translation between saying, "Hey, I'm really sorry I did this, but I didn't say I was gonna change." Now, usually, apologies follow some sort of change, right? That's when they're really
Changes follow, right?
yeah, right,
Mhm.
like yes. But maybe I just said, "I'm really sorry," and then the person's like, "Okay, great, that means they're never gonna do it again." And if I didn't have the intention to be like, "Well, I'm gonna try to not do that again, but I might do it again." Never know.
Well, I think what's interesting about that, at least what jumped out to me and the reason I sent it to you is pull up those things again and just
Mhm.
read the first part before the commas in each of those lines.
You want me to?
Just read those
Oh,
again. Yeah,
ooh,
without the second part. Just
okay.
read those again.
"I'm sorry. I care about you. I need you. I want you. I want to be with you. I'll try, and I love you.
Okay. The reason why I wanted you to
I,
do
I,
that,
I, I,
well,
I.
yes. But those are all things that I think generally speaking, we all say, these are the things we want to hear.
Sure.
These are the things we want to have somebody say to us. Now, that's the context of a romantic relationship, I think, for the most part. Although I think it can translate
Yes.
beyond that.
Yeah.
So I think it's more broad than just that. But those are all things that when we first look at them, we go, well, what's wrong with those?
Mm-hmm.
Those would be great things to hear or great things. But what I think we mean when we first hear those things is there's an assumption, yeah, I want to hear that and the follow through come with it. And that's what I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate about the second part.
Mm-hmm.
Now read the second part.
Let me read. Oh my gosh.
No,
I call this reading. Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
only the second part?
Only the second part.
Oh, is not the same as all change. Is not the same as I'm committed to you. Is not the same as I value you. Oof,
Mm,
that's rough. Is not
mhm.
the same as I'm ready for you. Is not the same as I'll make time for you. Is not the same as I'm consistent and doesn't mean I'm ready to love you forever.
Okay. Now, and all of those things, those go deeper than that first one, that first
Oh,
list,
100%.
right?
Mhm.
But just think of how the first ones are all the common things that we always say we want to hear. They're all the things that pop up in movies. They're all the things that we read in books. They're all part of the the stories we make up about what we really want to have in our relationships, whether they're romantic or otherwise. But
Mhm.
that second part goes a lot deeper than that, including that one at the end that's "I love you" doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to love you forever,
Mhm.
right? Those ones are deeper than that, and at least with some of them, consistency, right? All the I think these are things that we think go in that first column. If somebody's saying that, or at least there's the expectation that they're gonna follow through with those,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's one thing that stood out for me with that, with words and actions, because those words sound great, but that second part is a lot more about actions
Mhm.
as a result. To value somebody is a consistent series of actions, showing that over time. Consistency is also the same thing, right? Loving someone for perpetuity is a choice to continue to do that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong in my mind with those for that first set of words, right? All those things we like to hear. But I think what I like about that piece there is it says, it's not exactly enough if it doesn't mean this next set of things.
Right.
And that got me thinking. Right now, I was in the middle of kind of a real challenging week on a lot of levels, but that was more of a challenge for me because when I read that, I'm like, okay, yeah, I could say I want all these other things. That first column of things that you read, I could want all that in my life.
Mhm.
How good am I at the second column?
Oh.
How consistent am I in my relationships? How well do I show the value that people have in my relationships? How well do I choose how to love people? And like you said at the top of the show, how well do I do at expressing it in a way that they embrace
Mhm.
or that they recognize as opposed to what I think it should be? How well do I do those things? And I didn't reach a conclusion on that.
Oh, I was gonna say what came up for
No,
you.
no, just I asked him as kind of open ended. How well do I do those things? Right. Well, what about you? Like, when those came like, why did that resonate with you so much?
Sorry.
Yeah, you're having a lot of fun at my
I'm
expense.
trying.
That's okay. It's good.
Uh, it was really profound is not quite the right word, but it was really interesting to split those
Mm,
in between the first column and second column because the first time I read through it, I just read them.
yeah.
Kinda just coasted over it, liked the concept a lot, it really stuck about to me, but until I did, like what you said, where you broke them up into this and that and then read them, it really stuck out, a lot more because I too then questioned a bit, like, "Well, when I say this, do I really mean that, or
Mhm.
do I really resonate with the second half of those lines
Yep.
because I know I have been falling short in areas like that? Do I sometimes use the phrases from the first column to pacify a situation?"
Oh,
Yeah, I know, I really just laid myself out.
wow. Yeah,
Because
no, that's
I feel like there's times where that can be. Like, we'll just use it as a placeholder instead of either A, having a super uncomfortable conversation, or B, we're not quite sure how to have the conversation yet because we haven't worked it out enough to be able to express ourselves.
Mm.
You know what?
Right. Sure.
That's kind of what really was what was so impactful in that is when I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, I feel like I have sometimes done that where I've just kind of tried to patch up a situation instead of just really addressing it or being like taking on the responsibility
Mm.
of what I'm saying and what is
Yeah.
proposed now in the air that's unspoken
Mm.
and not clarifying that.
Yeah, because what happens then is the actions that may follow
Yeah.
are going to be interpreted by the other person and by yourself on the basis of whatever words are out there or the assumption of what
Yeah.
those words mean.
Yep.
And kind of connecting the dots between the two, like between those two sections, between those two columns of things. The words are good at the front end,
Mhm.
right? I love you is a good thing. I need you is a good thing, right? I value, but then the next part is you're going deeper than that and actually showing, not to put too fine a point on it, a staying power, right? In following those words with real actions that gives the other person and yourself the opportunity to see them in action,
Mhm.
right? And if we were to turn it around, right, and say, the actions that are listed there, if you do those actions without words, they can be appreciated, but also the words that go with it can be really powerful
Mhm.
if they're shown that, right? If you show that you're consistent in a relationship, when you do say the words, "I'm here for you,"
Mhm.
they already know that to be true, and it can be
Right.
a really reaffirming thing, right?
Mhm.
Because we've heard a lot of stuff. Words are many writers have written about this. Words are the most powerful tool we have to either build somebody up or tear them down, right?
Mhm.
We can go soothing a wound with words to creating a wound
Mhm.
with them in a second. The same can be true of actions. It's An action can build somebody up really quickly, can also tear somebody down really quickly.
Mhm.
And in relationships that are the primary thing that they need to have is connection underneath them. And I think that's where we can go next, coming on the other side of the
Oh,
break.
sure.
If they have that underneath them, those things can be navigated a little bit more, which is why the more time I thought about that piece from Mark Smith that I sent over to you, as much as I appreciate it, I don't think it goes quite deep enough. And so I have some thoughts on this. And what you just mentioned a minute ago really kind of opened the door for that for me,
Oh.
with that. So I appreciate you being vulnerable about that. So when we come back from break, let's dig
Mhm.
in. Let's dig in a little deeper underneath this, but this relationship between words and actions. So come on back here to Staying Power here just a minute, and yeah, see you in a minute.
We'll take it.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diaspora, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diaspora offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diaspora Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
Every day, women like me go to the doctor for annual checkups for conditions like breast cancer. Early detection saved my life. But women with disabilities face a cruel reality: inaccessible medical facilities and equipment.
I went to a doctor's office I was told was accessible, but when I got there, I couldn't get through the front door.
Our veterans deserve better. Help PVA fight for access at pva.org.
Alternative Talk 1150, the talk of the sound.
Welcome back to Staying Power. JD here with Ashley.
Hi.
as always, and happy to have you here with us on what is a beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest. We
So
hope it's really
pretty.
beautiful where you are. Spring is on its way, or actually it's technically here already, but it's showing up a little late up here, but nevertheless. So with that, let's continue this blooming conversation about, I know I had to do it, about
What
the
fun.
relationship between words and actions. And I don't want to turn this into this kind of limited false distinction between what's more important, the words you say or the actions you take, right? I mean, that tends to be where a lot of the conversations go in our relationships. And they are a litmus test, aren't they? When we meet people and we're developing relationships with them, we are paying attention to their words and their actions, right? And making choices accordingly to what degree we're willing to invest in them, to open ourselves up to them, to develop further relationships deeper, more broadly. Those are two big things, right? And hopefully they're also things that we're paying attention to in ourselves, right? The words that we use and the actions that we take. And all of these things, of course, are all shaped by our experiences as we grow up, as we go through, the roller coasters of life. And we do the best we can to make adjustments and to learn and to grow, or at least the hope is that we do. Right. So with that, okay, those hopefully what the first part of the show illustrated to all of you who are listening, that there's real benefits to words and to actions, and then there's also limitations if they are not connected, right? And that Mark Smith piece that you read, I think illustrated that. So I guess a better way of asking the question that I asked at the top of the show, where you said you hated that question.
Nothing like being honest.
Yeah,
right?
no, I'm glad. I'm glad.
I mean,
'cause
this is how we talk.
this is how we talk. And it
Very
is kind of a
straightforward
challenging,
and
it is
honest.
kind of a challenging thing to conceptualize. But I have some anxieties or some concerns about holding too tightly to these things about words and actions. There's something
Okay.
about it that seems incomplete, right? If we're just focusing and we're defining ourselves and we're defining people that we're in relationships with just on their words and their actions, I wonder if that's giving us everything we could be getting in our relationships. I wonder about that. I wonder if there's more.
What do you think else is there?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot the last few days. And I think about this a lot in general. I mean, it comes up with clients. Clients are talking to us a lot about words and actions, either the ones they've said and done or the ones that have been said and done to them. Here's what I think. I'm not sure we can define other people, judge other people, or really see other people, and vice versa, ourselves, if we're just focusing on words and actions.
So what else is there?
I think I'm not sure it's something else. I think it's
Okay.
what is underneath that.
Okay.
Words and actions like the ones laid out by Mark Smith, I personally think, cannot have the effect that we all want them to have if underneath all of that, between those two people, there isn't a connection to begin with. There isn't. And now, words and actions cultivate connection. So we're not talking about separate things, right? But from a place of connection, a connected conversation, words and actions like those, I think, resonate more clearly. We can see them in the moment better. And particularly in times of conflict, we can hold on to those things as the standard that we know a person has already set. Okay. So for example, one of the great gifts of our friendship, Ashley, is that we pretty much have connected conversations almost by default. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
We
I would
do.
agree.
Yeah, we do. It's a true gift. It's one reason why this show works so well, I think. We get, and how much feedback do we get from listeners that say, wow, it's like, I can tell you guys are genuinely having a conversation about things that matter. And the great thing about that is when you're having bad days and we're talking about it, and I can tell you're not on top of your game, I have a standard already set because of connection that we've developed that have been backed up by words we've said to each other and actions that we've taken with each other that back that up. And I'm able to go, okay, wow, she's just having a bad day today. Not because you take anything out on me, because I don't think you ever have. Right.
I don't think so.
I don't think you have.
Try not to.
Right. But that helps, right? Now, in other friendships, relationships I have, sometimes that's a little more elusive, right?
Sure.
Because if certain things in me get kicked off, right? We use the word triggers a lot. Sometimes I think we overuse it,
Yes.
but if we get hit on something that we're sensitive about, our words and our actions may not be coming from the best place, and they may not be coming from a place of connection, but a place of wound,
Sure.
And the more connected we are consistently, and the more our words and our actions are consistent from that place of connection, our wounds don't show up as much, or when they do, we're able to recognize them and not make things worse with our words and our actions
Yeah.
with that.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you think of that? Does that make sense?
It does, and I resonate with that. I agree with that. Going back to the example that you used with, like, if I'm having a bad day, but in the past, just because we've talked and we've built such a close friendship and whatnot, we've established, like you said, a standard. So, if
Mhm.
something's popping off with me and I'm having a bad day or whatnot, whatever's going on is not personal. I usually try to do my best to not have misdirected emotion and take anything out on somebody it's not meant to be taken out on.
With me, you do a really good job of that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, with me. I
Thanks.
never want to speak for, because I think each relationship is so
He's like,
is
everyone
so
else is
distinct.
just,
No,
open fire.
they'll
but
have they'll have their own opinions, right? Each dance is different, right?
yes.
Each relationship. So it's easier to not do that with some people
You're
than it
right.
is with others.
You're right.
That's all I'm saying. Okay, go
You're
ahead.
fine.
Sorry, I'm derailing you.
But but we've also set a standard. Like, I've set a standard with you that when I'm having a moment like this, the amount of attention, responsiveness, or depending on how much or how often, whatnot, like, that precedent has been set. So then, like, okay, she's having a rough day. Things are popping off left and right. Like, I'm probably not going to hear from her for like a solid 18 to 24 hours. If I
That's
message
true.
her something, there's a good
Mhm.
chance,
Yep.
unless it's like a real problem,
Yep.
I'm probably not going to get a response back from her,
Mhm.
and I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would believe that you don't take offense to that, because
No.
that's just been our precedent.
Yeah.
He's like, she'll resurface when she's ready.
Yep. And if I really need something, I'll tell you,
Right,
and you'll
right,
find time.
Right. But because we've set that. And so, even if I do something that seems like a little bit out of the ordinary, you still know, like, she's just dealing with something, and then she'll just come back when she's
Mhm.
ready.
Mhm.
If people can ever get to that level with the relationships that they have that really matter to them, I think would make a really substantial difference. Now, it takes a lot of work because, like you
Mhm.
said, we've put in the work
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
Like, we've known each other for a bit, and we've
Mhm.
had really deep, close, connected conversations. So we know this. And
Mhm.
we've also openly, specifically said that don't
Yeah.
expect anything from me. Right. So now we know that's the precedent.
Right.
But I think you can do that with a lot of things.
Mhm.
And I think the more that you can do that, obviously, the better your relationships are going to be. It does require something for you to come up, though, and really step into sometimes things that your knee jerk reaction, like you said, don't want to say triggered, but if you feel something
Mhm.
is done that hits a sensitive part of you, and our knee jerk reaction is to react.
Can be, for
And
sure.
yes, there's always that little twinge in there of like, ugh.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we usually want to retaliate it back to the person that did it to us in the first place,
Mhm.
whether they realize they did it or not.
Mhm.
And that's when obviously things can cascade downward.
Mhm.
It's good to be looking out for those things. When you feel that, take note and pay attention, because
Mhm.
then maybe that's something in you that is a story that's coming up that you should address.
Yeah.
Like, this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
Great that it's here, because now I have an opportunity to work on myself or see, like, what's going on, but
Mhm.
what's going on with them probably has nothing to do with me.
Right. Right. Something may have come up because of an interaction, or
Mhm.
some, perceived slight or a real slight. There's so many things. I think the other thing that comes to mind with that is we have learned to communicate what the other person needs and means.
Mhm.
And that's what it sort of requires. Like, the way you can shut off when you're in the middle of something is not something that I do, right? It's not something that I do. Now, and so it could be really easy if we didn't have connection underneath. This is my
Mhm.
point. We didn't have a connection underneath. I could get so hyper focused on that and be hitting you with shoulds.
Mhm.
You shouldn't do that, or like that's not helping you. That's not helping me. Blah blah. Holding you to a standard that I have for myself
Mhm.
instead of seeing what your standard is for you
Mm-hmm.
and working in between the space between those two things. Right. Now that can get tough, right? When we're having really bad moments, and I mean we collectively, not just you and me. When we have those times we're howling at the moon,
Mhm.
where things, the dark night of the soul, we have those moments. There are that mode. We know this neurologically. We cannot see larger context
Right.
when we're
Right.
when we're in that kind of dark place. We can't see larger context in ourselves, in other people. We can forget, even in our closest relationships, the
Mhm.
standard that has been set or
Mhm.
the evidence that whatever story is spinning up in that dark space is not true. We can forget all of that, right? That's actually a chemical thing in the brain because it's
Mhm.
fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Mhm.
And yet, if you have that stuff established outside of that, even in those moments where conflict will happen, you have a baseline set to be able to come back from that, even if you have to fight your way through it, right? Even if you do.
Mhm.
And that to me can be as difficult as it can be. It can be incredibly rewarding to find those spots, right? Where you kind of come out of those moments, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's like breathing air for the first time after,
Mhm.
like,
Being
not
underwater.
yeah,
Yeah.
right? There's something, like, just an overwhelming sense of relief
Mhm.
and weightlessness
Mhm.
that is almost, like, instantaneously feels a little bit healing
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. And you can feel the growth happen in a
Yeah.
moment, right?
Yeah.
And that's the power of repair. We talked about that a few weeks ago, right?
Mhm.
That's the power of repair is you end up in a in another level. Like you go up a level when you repair something
Mhm.
in a relationship of any kind, right? Or at least that's the hope. But it reminds me of something that Marianne Williamson, who's a spiritual writer, said in one of her books a long time ago, where in relationships in general, the difference that we're talking about is if if a relationship we're in is a painting on a wall, right? We tend to think that we're focusing on the painting,
Mhm.
right? That's the individualness of that person. But what we can accidentally do when we apply our own standard for ourselves to somebody else is we end up focusing on the frame,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
We think we're focusing on that person, but we're actually focusing on the frame, the thing that is wrapped around that. And then we start thinking this is what the painting should look like,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Yeah, it's because that painting is going to be unique.
Right.
The frame is just the frame. So the frame are our expectations. And if we're not careful, we can start projecting the expectations for that quote unquote frame into the painting when the painting is its own.
Mhm.
Because what's a greater masterpiece, right? What's a greater masterpiece? Something by Picasso, something by Jackson Pollock, something by Rembrandt, something by Da Vinci, something by Michelangelo. Isn't the answer yes?
Mhm.
Right? It's certainly we can have the debates about it, but they've all evoked something. They all illustrate something. The frame isn't worth a damn
Mhm.
other than just framing it with the appropriate color or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So I found that always really interesting, that the idea that we can lose sight of the painting, which is the other person.
Right.
A Jackson Pollock doesn't have to be a Rembrandt, right? A Michelangelo doesn't have to be Virginia Woolf,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't have to be. And why would we expect it to be? And why would we necessarily rank them,
Mhm.
right? So for me, it kind of brings it back around to that notion of the connection that we have, but that has to be based on the fact that we recognize and connect with a unique human being on the other side and a unique human being within ourselves,
Mhm.
one that is continuing to grow and to change. That's why this is such a minefield. That's why we have content for every single week on this show
That's true.
for as long as we want to go,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is the ongoing process that we all have in common, right? And so for me, words and actions of an individual person, I got to remember that they're their own painting.
That is such a fascinating concept,
Mm,
actually, that they are the painting and then our expectations
or
are
the
the
frame.
frame
Yeah.
around it.
I wish I had the quote from it. And in fact, I think she was actually lifting that from somebody else. So I can't remember who that came from. If any of you know who any of you listening know who said that, please let us know, because
Sure.
I'd really like to pull that up.
Whoever it was, props to them.
Props
'Cause
to
that's
them.
really good.
Yeah.
But it really is. It's a really good way to, no pun intended, frame the idea
That's funny.
of thanks. Uh, for listeners and viewers to grasp that concept, because
Mhm.
unless you spend time having these kind of conversations, unless you read things that are about this might be like a new idea that's never surfaced for a person
Sure.
before,
Sure.
and their mind just was blown.
Sure.
But this is a really practical way to then be able to look at a situation with a person under those lenses or through those lenses.
Mhm.
And it might make a world of difference for them to
Mhm.
understand, like, this person that I care about, or I would like to care about, or get to know better, or are important and valuable to me. Some pictures don't have frames.
That's right.
Like, a lot of paintings don't
Mhm. Yeah.
have frames.
Some are multidimensional, some are
Yeah.
nonsensical, some are actual representations, some are abstract.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so in that case, like, should there really even be expectations?
That's the
What do those expectations do? Now, expectations and boundaries and standards
Sure.
are different,
Sure.
because I do think boundaries and standards are good,
Mhm.
but I think expectations almost feel like they are very selfish and personal and have really nothing to do with the other person.
Mhm. That's
They're
the
all
frame.
about me.
Yeah,
They have
that's the
nothing to
frame.
do with them.
Yeah, that's the frame.
But,
And
like, why would we even have them then?
Mhm.
And maybe that's something that we should spend some time addressing within ourselves, of we have these expectations are
for results, I think.
because we wanna get something out of it.
Right.
So it's all about us.
Right.
But is that really worth it? Like, is that the goodness that can come out of that?
Well, that's a great question to have out there, because it seems to me then connection is the antidote to that.
Mhm.
Because if you're connected to somebody, really truly connected in the moment, and you build that over time, expectations don't stay part of the equation, because
Right.
you're seeing the other person for who they are. You're seeing the Rembrandt for the Rembrandt, and not wishing it was a Picasso,
Mhm.
right? Not devaluing it because it's not something you actually recognize as something you might prefer more. You're actually accepting it on its own terms.
Mhm.
And I realize we're sort of anthropomorphizing art here, but that's okay. But I think that's where the agreement part comes in. Like,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
would say so.
that's where that comes in, because agreements run counter to expectations, or at least they can be a result of open, honest conversations about the expectations you have,
Mhm.
right? And then finding an agreement on how best to deliver on those things.
Yeah.
That's what allows for more. But that's again for that Mark Smith piece that you read.
Mhm.
That's the second part,
Mhm.
right? If I tell somebody, I love you, I need you, I value you, or whatever the case may be, but there's no agreements, and I'm focusing on the frame, and they think I'm seeing them for the Rembrandt that they are, but instead I'm holding it against them that they're not a Picasso. That's not their fault.
Mhm. Yeah, when there's, like, that other whimsical phrase, and I'm probably gonna butcher it, but it's something about, like, you could be the sweetest peach in the world, but if they don't like peaches, it's never gonna work out.
Mm,
And I don't like
you
peaches, so
don't like
there's I
peaches. I
don't.
just
You
found
just
this
found that
out
out. Yeah,
today.
no,
Yeah.
it's gross. But, like
Anti-peach bias you've got, probably for good reason.
What?
I don't know. It's probably for
Why?
good reason.
I mean, I guess I've had some peaches that were okay, but they're never, like,
Mm.
anything. Anyways, peaches. But, you
Right.
could be you could be, like, the best, the brightest, the most beautiful of this, and
Doesn't matter.
and that's fine, because
Mhm.
you'll find your place where
Yeah.
you're meant to be, because you are the best and brightest and most beautiful of that thing.
Mhm.
But I do think this whole idea of expectations, sounds like it has a target in it,
It does.
and we are looking for somebody else to constantly hit an unspoken target.
Mhm.
I mean, sure, like, if someone tells me, "I love you," I'm like, "Oh, they're gonna love me forever."
Mhm.
No one's told me, "I love you right now, I'm probably not gonna love you in a month," or, "I love you right now, I don't know for how long."
Mhm.
Because if someone were to tell me that, then I would probably be like, "Would I invest in something like this if they don't
Mhm.
have any intention of sticking around?"
Yeah.
But it's a really honest statement.
It is, and yet, but it can also be true when someone says, "I love you" in the moment, and that's
Mhm.
the whole thing,
Mhm.
because that's all we've got really.
Yeah.
right, in that. And every single day, choices are made to say it, live it again until a day comes, maybe or maybe not, where you don't anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a challenge. Oh, we need to take another break. Holy cow, we got so wrapped up in this that we almost forgot to take a break. When we come back,
in a museum of art.
I know. Wow. I know. Now, when we come back from break, we will do our weekly segment. This week it is 2 Minutes of Terror. So come on right back after just a minute.
Did you know that 9 out of 10 Americans are sick of the divisions in our country? But there's one small step we can take to remember that we're still connected. All over America, strangers with different political views are coming together to talk about their lives, not politics, and discovering they actually have a lot in common. Because even if we don't see eye to eye, we can still talk heart to heart. So let's talk for a change. Learn more at takeonesmallstep.org.
Did you know that with certain designs and construction techniques, you can completely eliminate the cost of heating and cooling your home each month? For some homeowners, that can represent a savings of $5,000 to $10,000 a year with no loss in comfort. Want to learn more? Be sure and listen to Designing and Building Your Dream Home with your host, KT, Tuesdays at 1 p.m. right here on 1150 KKNW.
Bored with the other stations, hammering away on the same old talking points? Try Alternative Talk 1150 and get some variety.
Welcome back to Staying Power. JD here with Ashley.
Hello.
And we are coming around the bend towards the end of today's episode, entering the final stretch. And as we enter the final stretch, let's go ahead and jump into our weekly segment where Ashley and I each take about 2 minutes each to talk about something that happened during our week that either brought about terror or triumph. This week we are doing 2 minutes of terror. Here we go. Always so foreboding. I love that music though. All right, Ashley,
So
what do you got
strange.
this week?
I just got some honesty for you. That's all. So if people follow me online, you might notice that I try to be pretty consistent about posting things on the media, but I don't always. And it is a direct reflection of when I'm going through something tough, I do turn inward and I go pretty silent and I'm just like an asteroid flying through space. But I
That's vivid. Okay.
right?
Asteroid
But
flight.
anyways,
Yeah.
so I don't and people have reached out to me and they're always like, "Are you okay? Like, I don't see you posting online or whatnot." And a lot of times I'm like, "Well, I don't have time for that. Like, I'm stressed. Like, that's the last thing I want to be doing." But then I realize it's also a way to connect with people and not to say that I just want to like dump all my stuff online for people to read,
Right.
but I do think there is something about not just turning myself inward and keeping it all into myself. It's okay every once in a while to be honest with people and
Mhm.
actually and build connection that way.
There
And
you
that
go.
is something that I struggle to do because the imposter of it of like who's going to care about my issues and
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Why would I even bother putting it out there? However, when I run across other people's stuff online when they talk about things, I'm so engrossed and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh my gosh, I feel like I know them better. They seem so real and genuine." And I'm like,
Mhm.
I really struggle with doing that myself.
Okay. And so
So
was this a week where that was
yeah,
happening?
it was a total week where I'm like, I haven't been at training on the mats in like a few weeks. I've been,
Mhm.
which feels awful, and just all my normal things that I do, I have
Mhm.
completely shut them off, and it doesn't
Mhm.
feel great. So,
Gotcha.
anyways,
Gotcha. Okay. Well, mine was, you know, it goes without saying, and this is a gross understatement. We are living in an era of real change in the United States right now.
yeah.
And this is not to get into whether that is bad or good. What I can say is those changes are rippling out and are affecting more and more people as time goes by. And I got hit with one of those ripples this past week.
Oh,
And yeah,
sorry.
that's okay. It worked out. And in some ways I'm actually grateful for it. More or less what happened was some funding that I was counting on for some things that I've been doing got essentially ended, right? Unexpectedly out of the blue. And that put me in kind of a tough spot, a really tough spot. Short term, tough
Mhm.
spot, not
Mhm.
long-term tough spot. And I'm so grateful that I was able to at least see that, right? As difficult as it was, and it encouraged me and it forced me to have some uncomfortable conversations with people, to ask for help
Sure.
when, from people I didn't want to ask for help from, not because I don't trust them or it made me feel gross to do it, but genuinely because there's that expectation we all can put on ourselves that we need to be able to take care of our own stuff,
Mhm.
right? And it also forced me to think creatively about my next steps.
Hmm.
And in the process of thinking about those things and taking some chances and letting some people in on knowing what was actually going on, lo and behold, help arrived. In some ways I didn't expect, I never would have predicted, but it's been really good, and I'm looking forward to being able to build off of that. So it turned out to be okay. So on some level, started as a terror, has turned into a triumph, right? But it's really tough.
Hmm.
And this is going to happen more and more where, these types of dislocations are going to be happening more and more.
Mhm.
And it reaffirmed for me though the power of connection, the power of friendship, the power of family. When the chips are down, if you have that connection and have those communities built, people really like to show up for each other. They really do. And so I'm grateful in that regard for that. So that was mine.
Ouch.
Ah,
But good.
ouch, but good. Ouch, but good. And I'm still here, right? As what we say on the show a number of times, anybody who's here listening or watching has made it through 100% of everything that's ever happened to them, right? So
This is true.
that's a real thing. Right?
Mhm.
Okay. So, all right. With that, Ashley, let's
Mhm.
let's wrap up today's discussion in the few minutes that we have left on
Okie dokie.
his words and actions here. And we always like at the end of the show, after we've talked and gone in all the different directions we're going to go, to kind of give out hopefully some practical things on how you, the listener, can then, if some of this is resonating, what can you do actually, right, to help implement these things, right, in your life. And maybe it would help, Ashley, if you read those complete statements from Mark Smith that we talked about at the top of the show
Yeah?
for people to hear again.
Ooh.
And when you hear these again, everyone listening, you hear these again, think about that second part really,
Mhm.
and start asking yourself the question about how well do you show those things, and then how well are they shown to you in your primary relationships. That might be a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to encourage you to lean into that discomfort a little bit. So go ahead, Ashley, read
All
those
right.
again.
I just think you like it when I read on the
I
air.
do.
I
It's
you
awesome.
know
You have
what?
a
I could
good
read
cadence.
you know what? I could read your book.
You,
All right.
you could. It would take a long time to read that on the
Yeah,
air.
there's a lot of words.
There's a lot of words.
Okay. I'm sorry is not the same as I'll change. I care about you is not the same as I'm committed to you. I need you is not the same as I value you. I want you is not the same as I'm ready for you. I want to be with you is not the same as I'll make time for you. I'll try is not the same as I'm consistent. And I love you doesn't mean I'm ready to love you forever.
Mhm. Okay. So with those, it's
Mhm.
always a good practice. And I know you and I both do this, and we encourage our clients to do this. The continued self-assessment on things is
Mhm.
always valuable,
Mhm.
right? We talk about it with our values, we talk about it with our actions. In this regard, if anything's resonating in there, maybe for you, Ashley, is there any
Mhm.
one area in there that resonates for you, and what can you do to help bring that out?
Something does come to mind, and it's not necessarily one specific, but it's something that now I'm thinking about it, I think I'll do, and I would encourage our listeners and viewers to maybe do the same. But just as like a little inventory of yourself,
Mhm.
of you think of the people in your life that are really valuable to you, that you
Mhm.
really care about, maybe your top 5 or something like that. And go down and make a list of the things that you intentionally do for that person because they're important to you, because you love them, because you value them.
Mhm.
Because we know these people. You can probably picture who they are right now in your mind. And you're like, "Oh yeah, I would do anything for them." It's like,
Mhm.
"Well, when was the last time you did something for them?"
Mhm.
And if you take an inventory and be like, "Yep, I did this, this, and this." Okay, great, good. Maybe you're doing everything for them. But maybe you haven't done anything for them in a long time.
Mhm.
Now, those can look different depending on the person and what matters to them. Are they a wordsy person? Do they like, you could do the whole love language things with that. But I think it would be really good to take an inventory of what are you doing to show up for the people that you say that you care about
Mm-hmm.
so much. And if you're giving them the words, are you supplying it with the actions too?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So listing
That's what I
things out.
got.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Your
I
turn.
like that.
What do you got?
It's related.
Oh.
I think it starts with a reminder
Mhm.
that the one consistent element of every relationship that we are in and that we ever will be in is ourselves. So starting there, right? And then recognizing, using that art analogy, that everybody's a different kind of painting, right? And we don't expect one painting by one artist to look necessarily like a painting by another artist. We're fine with that. To what degree do we expect all the people in our lives to be kind of the same kind of painting,
Mm.
right? Are we seeing them for who they are? Do we know how they like to be affirmed, right? How they like to be seen? Do we know that? If we don't know that, how can we find out?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you and I had a shared experience last week with a friend of ours who we were in a really important conversation with this friend. And we were talking about a lot of really important stuff in our own lives, in our business interests, and all those things. And this friend of ours shared that, words of affirmation matter a lot. And he shared it after just giving him a lot of affirmation, right?
Yeah.
And not because he was seeking it or not because we were pandering,
Mm-hmm.
but because that's what genuinely came up in the course of this conversation. This is a friend of ours who is extraordinarily gifted, right? In a lot of different ways, and has
Many
been really
ways.
helpful for us and helpful to the show and a lot of those things. And I felt like we saw the painting that he is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to take that analogy out, perhaps he doesn't feel like he's a master work, right?
Mm.
Not all the time, at
Sure.
least. You know, maybe he doesn't feel like a Rembrandt, but that went a long way for him. But again, it's because established on the basis of connection, and we recognize those differences. So, to what degree are the people in your life Jackson Pollocks, and the biggest problem is you're wanting them to be Rembrandts, right? Is that going on, right? And if that's the case, because you like Rembrandts more, does that mean you can't have a Jackson Pollock in your life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are tough questions, and they're not meant to put forward as easy answers because all of this is uncomfortable, but it's part of the growth process that I think if we're honest with ourselves, if we want to be getting to the point where the actions and words that Mark Smith put forward there that you read, where those things fit together, this is the kind of work we have to be willing to do and be compassionate with ourselves along the way, right? These are easy things to overlook. These are easy things to miss on.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have our stuff. We all have our traumas. We all have our backgrounds. We all have our assumptions. And yet, if we want to have all those things and have those actions and words from other people and from ourselves be consistent, it's sort of what we have to do. Right. So that's what comes up for me. So how about that? How about them apples, Ashley?
At least they're not peaches.
They're not peaches.
Okay. Well, that was
All
fun.
right. So we've established that. So if anybody ever wants to get Ashley a gift, make sure it's not peach oriented.
Thank you.
Yeah, among other things. So, all right. Well, thanks, Ashley, thank you for what you shared there, particularly getting vulnerable on those things. That's not easy to do.
Well, that's what this show's about.
Yes, it is. That's what this show is about. And thank you for listening or watching this episode of Staying Power. Remember, if you missed any of this episode or any of the others, you can get this as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and in the show notes, all the contact info you need to reach out to Ashley and myself. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts on the show, suggestions for new topics, for guests. We'd love to hear from you. And we have more on the way, particularly under the banner of the Staying Power Network. More shows that encourage value, connection, and meaning are on the way. We're excited to share those with you as time goes by. We'll be back next week with another topic. Until then, I'm JD.
I'm Ashley.
We'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.